Hello, and welcome to A Postdoc's Journal, the show that takes you through my journey into and eventually out of academia as a postdoctoral research scientist. My name is Simit Patel. Hello, thank you very much for joining me. Welcome back to those of you who may have listened to the show before, and a very warm welcome to those of you who may be listening for the very first time. If you don't already know, this podcast is based on my own personal journal. In each episode, I read out a journal entry from 11 or 12 years ago, back when I was working in academia as a postdoc. Then I reflect on it, I analyze it, I try to make sense of it, and share my thoughts with you today with the benefit of over a decade of hindsight. If you are someone who can relate to things like imposter syndrome, loneliness, and just mental health issues generally in the workplace, whether you're in academia or not, I hope that by sharing my own personal experience with you, it helps you to feel a little bit less alone. In this episode, we jump to September 2014, well into my second contract extension. This really was one of the most stressful periods of my postdoc. I basically had 4 months left on my contract at this point, and I was panicking a little bit about how best to spend the remainder of my time. I had got myself into quite a difficult position at this stage, and I felt like I was just running out of options in terms of how to be successful in academia. With hindsight, I can say that I was frankly a bit delusional about my chances of salvaging my academic career at this point. There was still a part of me that was trying to still solve that problem, even though it was basically impossible for me to do everything that I needed to do with the little time that I had left. I guess I was just in denial somewhat about the fact that academic success just wasn't possible for me anymore. So this entry is really about me trying to navigate the end of my postdoc. Before I read out the journal entry, if you've listened to the show before and you've liked it and you found it interesting, I would really appreciate it if you could take just 1 minute of your time to leave a review or some stars or hearts or thumbs or whatever you use to show your appreciation wherever you are listening to this. If you normally subscribe and follow things, please subscribe and follow this podcast too. I've also started a Reddit channel where you can join the conversation. Links to everything are in the show notes. So have a listen to the reading now, and I'll be back at the end to share some thoughts after 12 years of hindsight. Enjoy. September 4th, 2014. Crunch time, again. I've entertained the idea of applying for a DFG grant now. I think with a strong enough idea, I could stand a chance if I work it as a first-time proposal. The only thing stopping me is the timescale, and not really having enough of a strong idea. This timescale just doesn't work. If I start now, I might get the proposal submitted by the end of October. And it will take 6 to 8 months before it gets awarded, if it gets awarded. What am I supposed to do in the meantime? Come January, that's it. To have a job in January, I need to be job hunting now. And it would have to be another postdoc for the DFG grant to make sense. That probably means me having to move. So it then becomes a long-term goal to come back to work in Frankfurt at the end of next year. Getting the FISH project done, as in analysed, written, published, doesn't seem feasible to me, so I'm reluctant to even try. If by some miracle I manage to get the manuscript submitted before Christmas, which would mean I wouldn't get the grant proposal submitted, I wouldn't be able to work on the paper revisions because I wouldn't have a job. And I wouldn't even have the right to work on it any further because it wouldn't really be my research anymore. Technically, it would belong to my boss, who I would no longer work for, and my research institute, where I would no longer work. I won't be able to access the data, access any of my emails or anything. I wouldn't even be allowed to enter the building anymore. I would just be some unemployed person. If I am definitely leaving, and there is no possibility of me staying in January, I will either be unemployed or working somewhere else. So it doesn't seem wise to commit to doing any work now that requires me to be around next year. Working on the fish project just feels like too much of a long-term investment because the publication process is too long. And I don't have the time to wait around to get a return on that investment. I'm curious as to what would actually happen if and when I leave. Would the next postdoc take over the fish project and go on to publish it as the first author, the same way that I took over other people's projects and published as the first author? If that's the reality, it seems wise to leave the work in a state that makes that process easier for my successor, i.e., not to have too many loose ends, like a half-published paper. So my ideal options in the next 3 months are 1. A preliminary analysis of the fish project and put it into a grant proposal, with the ultimate goal of coming back. Meanwhile, job hunt for another postdoc. Would I have to stay in the German academic system? 2. Try to get the fish project fully analysed and fully written up and published. 3. Quit academia entirely. This is all so much more complicated by the possibility of having to leave Frankfurt, having to give 3 months' notice for my apartment, my phone contract, electricity bill, etc. I need to commit to those things now. Okay, thank you very much for listening to that. As usual, I've written down some thoughts after reading that back and hearing that back. Similar to the last episode, I was actually quite surprised at how hard I was actually trying to stay in academia. I'd actually forgotten that I was trying this hard. I felt extremely stressed when reading that entry back again. I can remember this being one of the most stressful periods of my postdoc. So I can't really read this without feeling that same tightness in my chest and around my throat that I felt back then. I am slightly comforted knowing that it all actually worked out for me in the end, but at the time I didn't know it was going to be okay. I've got a relatively short discussion on this one because I don't want to retread some of the same topics that we've covered recently in previous episodes. I want to talk a little bit about the timescale issue I wrote about, and I want to give you some insight into what actually happens to the research when you actually finish a postdoc. But this journal entry is really all about me trying to solve the conundrum of how to salvage my academic career. I somehow had to figure out how to apply for a grant, find another job in the interim, get all my research done and published, and maybe move away from Frankfurt and then back to Frankfurt again in the future. At the time, getting out of that postdoc with my academic career intact seemed like an impossible problem that I couldn't solve. It was a bit like being stuck in an escape room, except there really was no solution to get out. At the time, there were very long delays in applying for a grant and actually being awarded that grant if you get awarded that grant. Back then, it was something like 6 to 8 months you have to wait. I don't know if that's still the case today, but academia tends to evolve on geological timescales, so I assume that's still the case today. So given that timescale, to have had a grant to support me after the initial 2-year contract, I would have had to apply for a grant at the end of my first year of my postdoc. And that's assuming that the grant would be awarded at all, which is, of course, not guaranteed. So this means that everything would have had to have gone great for me in that first year of my postdoc for any of this to be possible. So in addition to me bringing my peak performance, I need all the things that were out of my control to work in my favor in that first year too. I would have needed all the problems to have been solved before I arrived, and I would have needed all the luck to be on my side too. And then I could have maybe been in a position to apply for a grant in time. If you've listened to season 1 of this podcast, which covered the first 2 years of my postdoc, you'll know that my first year of my postdoc did not go so smoothly for me. Regarding my peak performance as a scientist and as a human, I think for me that happened much later on in my scientific career, as you might expect with experience. And everything outside of my control just didn't necessarily line up for me too well either. Reflecting back on it, I realize now that ever since my difficult first year back in 2012, it was basically impossible for me to ever be successful in academia for the timescale reason alone. I was surviving from extension to extension, just hoping that I was moving in the right direction. Now, I'm not saying that with hindsight, I should have just quit after my first year. Absolutely not. And if you're listening to this and you've had a difficult first year of your postdoc, please don't quit. That's not what I'm saying. It was still incredibly valuable for me to have gone through the postdoc process that I ended up going through. And I wouldn't have been successful outside of academia without that time. I spent all those years after my difficult first year in academia developing all the knowledge and skills that I needed to be successful outside of academia. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was actually moving in absolutely the right direction. At the time, I thought I was moving in the direction of salvaging my disastrous first year and building a strong academic profile so I can go on to be successful in academia. That's what I thought at the time, but in reality, I was actually just building all the skills and knowledge I needed to be successful outside of academia. I guess it's not always obvious what path you're actually on when you're actually on it. In the end, it was still a valuable period of training for me, and I was moving in the right direction. It's just that right direction was outside of academia. It wasn't my intention at the time, but that's how it all worked out. In this entry, I wrote about how I didn't really know what would happen if and when I ended up leaving academia. I wasn't sure if I could continue to work on the projects or access the data to do the analysis or even access my email address. If I stayed in academia, perhaps at a different university, did that grant me certain privileges compared to if I left academia entirely? And you might be wondering the same thing if you're in a postdoc right now. Fast forward to April 2015, which will actually be season 3 of this podcast if you stick with me for that long. What I ended up doing, I basically handed over everything of my active research projects to my boss and delegated other responsibilities to other members of the team. I was able to get the research project I was working on at the time to a state where the big chunk of the actual analysis was actually complete, and I had written up all the methods that I did for the lab work and the analysis in a Word doc, and I sent that to my boss. I also documented the various other things and explained how to do them to other members of the group. I still had my name on many of the papers that were published on the projects I was associated with, even after I left academia. And I was loosely involved in the publication process after I left, things like checking the manuscript and adding comments and things here and there. But my boss was really the one driving those projects. Doing things this way, so getting all my projects to a state where I could just sort of have a really clean finish and just hand it over, that is actually a really nice, clean way to leave academia. I honestly don't know what it would have looked like if I ended up staying in academia, perhaps in a different research institute. My feeling is it would have been a lot messier in terms of the project handovers. If we were continuing to collaborate on different projects and papers, there would have been a lot more ambiguity about who's in charge of what and who's doing what on what project. In the end, I think leaving academia was much more appealing for me because it made the handover of everything less ambiguous. But we'll explore more of that in season 3. So there you have it. Like I said, a very short discussion today. And as I said at the start, after revisiting that journal entry, I think I was rather delusional about actually being able to salvage any of my academic career at this point. But up until that point in my life, trying hard to continue on the academic trajectory was all I knew. That's what I had done all my life up until that point, and I didn't really know how to do anything else. One reason all of this was so challenging for me at the time was that I just didn't have anyone to share any of this with. It was hard to open up to any of my academic colleagues because I didn't want them to see me in a negative way or see me as unmotivated or weak somehow. And I felt like any of my friends or family outside of academia just wouldn't understand. So if you feel stuck and you feel like it's impossible for you to stay in academia, let me tell you that, firstly, you are not alone. It may not feel like it, but you are actually on the right path. It's just not always obvious where that path is leading at the time when you're actually on it. In the next episode, we jump to about 1 week later. I actually start to face up to the reality of having to maybe leave Frankfurt. And I attempt to open up to my boss a little bit about my feelings with somewhat disastrous results. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that was valuable for you in some way. And until next time, please be kind to yourself.
Brood about it, brood until the day, one day I will find the words to say.
Thanks again for listening to A Postdoc's Journal. I've been your host, Simit Patel. If you've enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others who you think might find it helpful and interesting. You could also leave a review over at Podchaser or on Apple Podcasts. If you can relate to anything in this episode, or if you have your own take on that journal entry, I would love to hear from you. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Blue Sky, or Reddit. Links to all my social media are in the show notes. Thanks again. Before we get into the reflection, I want to ask you a quick question. Do you ever worry about your paper being rejected because the English isn't good enough? One thing I've always been good at is writing, but I know not everyone finds that easy. Perhaps English isn't your first language, or for some reason, the words you write just don't quite capture what you want to say. Good English can enhance your scientific credibility, increase the chance of your article being accepted, and speed up the peer review process. Whether you're a research scientist, a scientific writer, or part of a dynamic biotech company, I want to help you with my professional copy editing and proofreading services for scientific English. Enhancing the clarity and precision of writing has been an integral part of my professional life in academia and in the biotech industry for over a decade. If you need a native English speaker with a solid scientific background and a professional certification in proofreading to refine and polish your writing, I would love to help you. Please visit simitpatel.com, that's SIMITPATEL.com for more information. Thank you, and now back to the show.